This idea of trying to open the podcast with something different or catchy is just getting to be too much. If only I had help. If only I had help.
You called?
Yes. Oh, great kazoo. Didn't you hear me calling you?
When? Of course not. I've been sleeping.
Bruh, isn't that your job? To be there and look out for a brother?
My dear fellow, I'm not only undependable, but I'm a bit of a kook. That's why I'm here, remember? I'm being punished.
Really? Punished? You act like I call you that often. It's been a minute since I actually needed your help, bro. Plus, I looked out for you that last time. I sent a very nice email to your supervisor.
Why don't you try counting on yourself?
Oh, it's like that, son? Alright, forget you. I'll just do the regular intro myself without you. You know what I mean? Drop the beat. What's up, Read My Mind Radio family? My name is Thomas Reed. I'm the host and producer of this podcast featuring compelling people impacted by all degrees of blindness and disability. I should clarify that a bit because I think it may get lost. People impacted by all degrees of blindness and disability? This includes all those experiencing disability directly. A person new to blindness, for example. But it also includes their family members and friends, the teachers of the visually impaired, O&M and rehab instructors who teach the white cane, for example, or other daily living skills. There are also those in supporting industries from technology, accessibility, and of course, audio description. I consider all of this to be summarized by impacted by all degrees of blindness and disability. For the record, I think our entire society is impacted by disability, but we don't all happen to realize that or even feel that way. But don't worry, y'all. Eventually, they'll catch up with us. That's on them. So let us just keep doing our thing.
Oh, look, I don't wish to stay here forever. And since I am supposed to serve you, I will try. But take heed. Don't ask for more than you can handle. You may get it.
Maybe I don't need help. I think I got an idea.
We'll see you tomorrow. Maybe.
Read.
My mind.
Read.
My mind.
Today, I'm bringing you excerpts of some conversations I had over the past few months with multiple audio describers, specifically writers and narrators, each bringing their own perspective and background. AD is still new. There's no one right way. With there being so much more to audio description than what we hear, it's past time that we hear from a more inclusive set of people involved in the process. So this is the first in the series I'm calling Flipping the Script on Audio Description. You know, sometimes you just need to hear from another side. Now let me introduce you to my guest.
My name is Alejandra or Alejandra Ospina, depending on your audience.
That's what I'm saying. The Read My Mind Radio family, like our world, is diverse. And that's how we roll.
My business cards have a long list of things, but I like to consolidate it into what I'm calling a media accessibility provider. I do closed captioning, and I do transcription, and I do translation and audio description. So I like to imagine that the things I'm doing all sort of promote access to content. I don't consider myself as often a content creator, but I like to facilitate people getting to see or hear or know what they're watching.
That makes me think Alejandra's introduction to media access is personal.
Having close friends and chosen family that are blind and visually impaired, and I spent a lot of time describing things for them, so it sort of was a natural progression. Related, sort of anecdotally, growing up as the primary English speaker in a Spanish-speaking family, I spent a lot of time explaining things too, so the concept of explaining comes naturally to me.
That's sort of his home for me. My mom played that role for much of her family. One thing I know is that can be a great way to develop an advocate spirit.
I was one of those folks that got on my high horse, which isn't very high, about having people on social media describe images and photos that they post. So I've spent a lot of time in the last 5 years gently shaming or encouraging people to describe the things they post on social media. And over time, that has caught the attention of folks in disability community, in communities of people that are doing this kind of work. And it was sort of a natural progression.
Next, one of the first describers to provide a visual description of themselves. This prompted me to not only begin asking other describers to do the same, but really to think about incorporating that going forward with all interviews. Here's Liz Thompson, who's currently pursuing a doctorate degree in disability studies.
LizThomson. I would visually describe myself as a dark-skinned, 5'2" person with black eyes and black-rimmed glasses. Currently, I have a mostly shaved head with a band of 2-inch short black hair. I identify as someone who is disabled, also bisexual and queer, a Vietnamese adoptee, mostly grown up and worked in the Midwest, currently working on my doctorate degree in disability studies. I use they, them, their pronouns.
You can say Liz had a fast-track introduction to AD, learning of it and experiencing it all in the same evening.
One of my good friends who is low vision, he invited me to go to a disability cultural program. At the very beginning of the program, they asked if anyone needed headsets for audio description. He's used to that, and I think he typically takes advantage of that accommodation, but I had never heard of that. And so I was like, oh, hey, I'll try it out. So I got my headset. I believe this was kind of like an open mic performance.
It included things like poetry, dance or movement, and other artistic expressions. Probably not the most traditional first experience with audio description.
So that really got me hooked.
My name is Chanel Carson. I am a freelance audio describer out of Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm also the senior audio describer at the Smith Center for the Performing Arts in downtown Las Vegas. I've been working with the Smith Center for actually 8 years now. About 5 years ago, actually, during one of our pre-shifts, they just asked if anyone was interested in learning how to do audio description. At the time, I was 22, just out of college. I had been studying film with a focus on screenwriting. I was thinking, oh, this sounds like it's right up my alley. I'm a writer, and at the time, I was very interested in learning how to do voice acting work. Didn't hear anything for a few months. Then they sent me and another woman off to get trained at Joel Snyder's audio description seminar.
Was it kind of hard to take what you learned and go right into the live stuff?
Oh yeah, it was extremely difficult going from the training into doing live theater because the training was so heavily focused on TV and film that sure, the basics stuck, like, oh, don't talk over the dialogue. Blind people aren't idiots. Don't worry about being too tender or politically correct really with your description. Just what you see, you describe. Of course, with TV and film, when you're doing a description for that, you have the lovely pause button. You don't necessarily have that for live theater. You can't go, hey guys, I screwed up. Can we go back? So it's very much having to learn how to do things on the fly.
Like Chanel, Liz too completed the ACB AD training. Similarly, the application was less about TV and film.
I'd done photography ever since I was in middle school. I did photojournalism at my high school newspaper and college. As a photojournalist, I was realizing I wasn't doing that either. I wasn't adding alt text. I wasn't adding description in my caption to make it kind of more integrated. I would add a caption, but I wouldn't add the actual description. Today,
Liz can take up to 25 minutes crafting an image description when preparing to upload.
Sometimes people are like, how can you do that? Do in their eyes, the extra time and labor to do the audio description. My response now is, how can you afford to not?
Even if you put aside making the world a more accessible place for all, boring, there are some real benefits.
It makes me look at my images more closely. It makes me reflect a lot more on the images that I shot.
That reflection can lead to a better understanding beyond the pixels. Photography biases, for example.
Not taking images of people with disabilities, taking more images of cisgender men.
It's not just about description. Liz is thoughtful about phrasing.
Language is also fluid and socially constructed and also has different meanings over generations and time, like modern and traditional. Well, that means something very different now than it did in 1940. My first draft will be one way, and then I'll look at it later on in the day, and then I'll change it. If I say something like traditional, then I have to ask myself, well, what do I really mean? And also, what did I really see? It's about writing and saying what you saw.
In addition to learning the sort of standard ways that one is meant to do audio description for video, for things like Netflix and Amazon, I've also been thrown into the world of how do you break that open and describe differently in ways that are actually respecting the culture, respecting the art, becoming part of the art, and not just being tacked on after the fact because somebody doesn't want to get in trouble for not providing access.
I find it very empowering to see a lot of that pushing of the boundaries around audio description coming from the disability community. It's no surprise that Alejandra has worked with Alice Shepard and Laura Lawson, who we featured here on the podcast, all sharing this way of looking at audio description as more than an access accommodation.
I don't have a specific background in writing, but I have a specific background in wanting to be right. So
I like it.
Given that I have a personal investment with my community and the people that I care about.
That's the disability community. When you're connected like that, it's more than a job. For the record, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that being a job that you perform professionally.
I have AD on for almost everything that I watch, as well as captions. And there have been so many times where I'm like, that's not right. I don't like that.
Word selection? Maybe failure to fully describe what was on screen?
We both know that a lot of it is in the timing. And again, it's because AD is added on after the fact. There are some really interesting things that I've been able to consult with. I did a live audio description for a panel sponsored by the New York University Center for Disability Studies. It featured the short films of a filmmaker named Jordan Lord. They create autobiographical films, but the AD is baked into the narration. It's written sort of in a prose style. The shots sort of follow as it's written. So it's not something that you have to add on after the fact. The filming is informed by what the filmmaker has written. And it's very interesting. And I think more films should be made that way.
Have you always identified as disabled?
No, I haven't. 4 or 5 years ago, as I was in the disability studies program, another student was talking about her letter of accommodation and just her relationship to disability and her own disability identity. She also had mental health issues and mental health things. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm also part of this community and I didn't even know.
How do those identities impact how you write description?
I don't think people are talking about this, the identity of the describer or the person who does the voice, who writes it. They've made a huge impact on how I think about audio description and describe.
While working on an art gallery project, Liz and a colleague each drafted what they referred to as positionality statements. This included their bios and a statement about how they became involved with description.
If you're going to read a book, you might want to know a little bit about the author. You don't have to. We are not in a post-racial world. I think it's very important and necessary to know that if you're in an art gallery or a theater or a TV film, that you definitely need to know who is writing the book or that script or who is doing that painting, where they're coming from.
Liz, again, who completed the ACB audio description project training, refers to one of the lessons taught.
In Snyder's training, even in his book, I don't know about other people's training and workshops, but there's about 2 sentences about race, and that's about it. Basically, just to kind of paraphrase, it says, to describe race, if it's important.
The guideline refers to importance in regards to the movie's plot. But like Liz says,
I would offer it's always important.
It's especially important to those who are marginalized. those who have been under or misrepresented on and behind the camera. Important to those who care about equity and justice. Important to those who want to see the real world, which includes so much more than just white men. My words, not Liz's. Important is subjective. So who should make the determination when it comes to consuming content? I propose the consumer. In order to do that, blind consumers need that information.
If you are describing race, you need to do it for all the people or all the characters and not just the people of color, because otherwise it centers whiteness. So I agree with that. What I've experienced, though, race is not described. Even in, for example, Black Panther, or in some movies or TV shows that is predominantly people of color.
Traveling Broadway shows, they are so white. Like, I will be the first to admit, and I am about as white as you can get. Thank God, more recently, we have had a lot more diversity in shows. Hamilton is like the perfect example of this. Also, Hadestown more recently. I will absolutely go out of my way to make sure to point out that there are Black actors, Hispanic actors, Asian actors in a show, just because I really want to celebrate the diversity of these shows going forward. I will do the same thing when I'm doing Cirque du Soleil as well. The audience will always be very diverse as well. So it's great for someone who may not be sighted or have low vision to be able to imagine themselves within that person in the show.
And if we're going to change the way we think about race and privilege, it's just as important that non-people of color also see and acknowledge and respect this diversity. Like the saying goes, things are rarely black and white. There's lots of shade in between. Those shades are important and often reveal other stories.
If I do distinguish between someone who might be light or medium or dark skinned, is that perpetuating colorism? I don't want to perpetuate colorism. On the other side, probably when people in TV or film make casting decisions, they are making decisions like that, unfortunately.
Colorism, or the practice of favoritism towards those with lighter skin, has its roots in slavery and white supremacy. It's not exclusive to the U.S. or to African Americans, but rather throughout communities of color. Acknowledging a person's color as description does not perpetuate colorism. A blind viewer wanting descriptive information about a person doesn't make them a racist. Including editorials such as the prettier or menacing, followed by the color or racial identification, well, that's another story. It's going beyond what's required for audio description and providing opinion or analysis, which is the responsibility of the consumer alone. Alejandra brings up an interesting point around identity.
I'm Hispanic, but I have a lot of experience code switching and ultimately being very white passing, both in my physical appearance and in my voice. And whether or not I realize it or I admit it in different situations, that's opened different doors for me.
And yet,
the two things are very separate, AD script writing and AD voicing. But I've done some AD script writing for some Netflix shows as a contractor. Not particularly things that I have found super exciting, but they needed somebody to write a script. And then I didn't get to voice those things because AD voice work is like any kind of performance and acting work. They sort of have to want you for the part. I think it's important for the voicing of audio description to match the tone and the content and the intention of the work, and I don't see that happening. Not very often, anyway.
And then there's physical access for the creation of accessible digital content.
At a practical level, places that are doing audio production, voice recording, and audiobooks, even our local library that handles recordings for the NLS, booths are tight and wheelchairs are not. This is not an experience that these places generally have. They're not generally expecting a wheelchair user to come in to record. And that's unfortunately like everywhere else. I've had to have this discussion. Yes, I use a wheelchair. Yes, we're going to have to make adjustments to the booth so I can get inside. You can just barely squeeze into this booth, and you need space to do these things. And I'm also very interested in Spanish language content AD as well, because there's not as much of it.
This raises the question of non-English access in general, something I failed to personally remember on my own when thinking about access.
Each studio sometimes has their own rules of stuff that you can or cannot say.
I've heard this about Disney. At first, you may think, well, Disney produces a lot of content for children, so they're being sensitive to the viewer. But remember, it's on screen. And it's not just Disney. It's not just the censorship that annoys me. But even in terms of researching this, we'd need sighted help.
If we as describers, similar to people who do interpretation with like ASL, if someone swears, the interpreter should interpret that. I think the captioner should caption that because that's what the person said. So similar to audio description, I think we also have that obligation.
Whatever the medium, television and film, live theater, video games, museums, art galleries, and yes, you too, right now uploading your images to social media, getting all of these content creators to know and think about audio description needs to be a goal. The benefits of AD extend further than the consumer. We all win.
Regardless of what I'm watching now, if it's a TV show, if it's a movie, if it's another stage show, I find myself kind of like mentally describing it like I would do it for an actual performance. So it's very much changed my viewpoint of media in general.
I know I've heard some conversation around what qualifies someone as an AD professional. A specific number of training hours? Certification, perhaps?
There are many, many folks who do this work because they have particular kinds of voices, because they can crank it out, because they're smooth, and more power to them. I just am not that kind of describer because I have a very particular investment in my community and in the work that I'm producing. And that doesn't mean that other folks aren't doing high quality work. It's just that what is informing their work is very different.
For an example of what's informing her work, you can hear Alejandra narrating Alice Wong's Disability Visibility, first-person stories from the 21st century, right now on Audible. The book is also available on Amazon and other outlets. And it's Alice, so you know it's in a variety of formats, because access is love. Alejandra does a great job narrating, and I highly recommend the audiobook. Shout out to all of my guests for taking the time to speak with me. Alejandra Ospina. You can find Alejandra at superaleja.org. That's superaleja.org. The site includes links to all social media. Liz Thompson and Chanel Carson. You can find both on Facebook, especially in the audio description discussion group. This just in. It's official. You are all a part of the Read My Mind radio family. I have a couple of more episodes that I'm including in this Flipping the Script on Audio Description series. I'm not publishing them back to back though, so if you're interested in the subject and want to make sure you don't miss the next installment, please allow me to make a suggestion. Subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Transcripts and more are over on readmymind.com. And yes, that's R to the E-I.
D, and that's me in the place to be.
Like my last name.
You think you'll be back? I don't know, Vaughn. Might be better if he wasn't. Look at all the trouble he caused us.
He caused us, or we've caused us. I wonder which it really is. I think you'll be back.
Looks that way. Night, Vaughn.
Good night, Fred.
Peace.